Hello, Christopher. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Christian, how's it going? Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
No, this is fun. I'm excited to get to know a bit more about your work and about your impact in organizations. And I'm very grateful to have had the connection through Pablo with you. So I'm very excited for our conversation.
Me too. Thank you very much for making yourself available. It's going to be thrilling, exciting to talk a little bit about the culture, corporate culture, whatever type of culture that we have, coaching, et cetera, whatever comes to mind. So really looking forward to the conversation. So thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, let's get to it. Why don't we start by letting listeners know what you do? So, Christopher, what do you do?
Um, well, right now I'm actually trying to raise two little kids. So I'm a father of two daughters. So one is about to turn 7, the other one about to turn 9. So that's like my favorite hobby. This is my biggest teachers, my biggest mentors, I guess. So that's one analogy that we usually use because it's true. You never look back and you never look down, and you have like your kids are the best teachers that you might have in life. But actually, with the company, what we do is, and our purpose as a company is uh, helping companies to explore the art of the impossible. And why the art of the impossible is because obviously everyone wants to make what's possible, but no one wants to try what's impossible. So we just help them navigate through that impossible structure, impossible path, and just, hey, let's just deep dive. No one else is going to dive into this route. So why don't we do that? So that's one of the biggest passions that we have, not only from a coaching perspective, but from a cultural perspective, leadership, communication, strategy, everything that no one else is doing, we like to do. And the on top of that, we definitely like to do it in a disruptive way. So meaning where we're just the catalysts when it comes to culture.
Well, that sounds like an incredibly fun job. I mean, but I want to be a bit more specific. Like, what does tackling the impossible mean in a day-to-day context? Like, let's say we're running a traditional business. We have a printer. We sell printed gear, like on tote bags. This is just coming up. Like, I'm just
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
riffing. Yeah. What does it mean? Because I think there's two layers. There's like imagining the impossible, like coming up with something that's never been done before, and then there's the tactical steps to doing it. So what does that mean? What does the process look like for your customers as they're beginning their journey?
So first is just understanding where do you want to be? Where's the need? What do you want out of it? But before that is it's where what's your why? Where does this come from? Why are you trying to do this? I mean, to what is it connected to? So that is the first step for us to connect. Because obviously right now we're also living in a world where you can either partner with companies that you feel connected or attracted to, but that connection has to be through a purpose. So I think that that's point number one. Point number two is just understanding what that means and what do you want to accomplish. And you brought the printers. Okay, so why are we printing? What is it about printing that we're doing? What type of experience are we going to deliver to the client? Are we only going to let them know that we print stuff? Or is there a purpose behind it? Like, do we deliver that experience? So I think that we deep dive into helping companies to understand what that experience and what that why is before going into the market or before sharing that why with their own employees, with their own company. And that's basically how it goes. So it's from point number one on understanding and grasping your why into understanding why you're doing that and then moving into the experience. That's what the whole exploring is all about. So let if you come to think about it, you go to a camp, you go fully prepared, you have all your gear, etc., but something comes up. Something comes up, you maybe you found a river and you didn't have the proper shoes. You found fire. You don't know how to react. You're thirsty. So there's a lot of things that might happen that you weren't prepared for. So that is the art of the impossible. What to do when those things come? What to do when those things happen? Because obviously, right now we're in a world where everything moves so fast that you normally don't take a step back, nor you take the time to plan. So you're actually planning as you go, which is why we're helping companies just to, hey, listen, take a step back, understand, move forward, but with the movement, right?
Yeah, the like iterations and sort of design
Right. Just
thinking type of,
one afterward. Right. Design thinking is one of them. Actually, yeah, you're more like an expert than I am.
I don't know if that's true. um, but so do you work directly with organizations as a whole or with the founders or CEOs? Like what type of engagement do you do? Because I feel like there's a lot of top down directives that need to happen for the company to embrace a change, you know?
Without a question. I mean, and we've found that there's, there's a fun thing about it because change is always asked from the bottom, and usually it's harder to get those sponsorships from the top. You have these guys that want to change, they want to move, they want to drive forward, they understand because obviously they're the ones that have their sleeves off. And there's the executive piece that has only one visual, they only have one lens, etc. And they're looking at numbers, KPIs, indicators, OKRs, etc. But obviously, things need to change from a cultural perspective, and they're always driven by the bottom layer. You always have this one person on the C-suite side that they're always looking to support or voice out those messages that he gets from the bottom layers. So we get into the company through HR, through CEOs, through finance, depending on who's driving those changes and who's actually looking to sponsor and who's conscious of the need of change, right, Christian? Because I think that that's step one. You need to be self aware. You need to be conscious that obviously there's a need for change, but there's a need to do something about it. So if it's either usually because from what we do, it's usually HR. But obviously, we also get requests from CFOs, from CEOs, and from some COOs as well. But I think that those are like the four layers. Um, One of our biggest sponsors are middle management. Why? And that's something like that you see mostly in Latin America. In the North America market, it's usually the C-suite that looks for these types of approaches, but in Latin America, it's driven by the mid layer, which is something very interesting because they are the ones that are voicing out, and once it echoes, then the C-suite start to move along and carry on. And I'm sure that you've seen it because there's a complete difference on how you handle the North American market versus the Latin American market.
Actually, this is a fun tangent that I didn't
Yeah.
necessarily plan to get into, but that is one of the most interesting parts of my professional experiences, comparing and contrasting the hyper corporate, tech enabled, metrics driven business culture of the U.S. versus the more relationship driven,
Right.
ritual driven corporate cultures of Latin America, and they are very different. As a person stuck between both worlds, I think that I'm still somewhere between the values of either or, because they do afford
Yeah.
different kinds of visions. But obviously, in terms of material output, you could very easily see how the U.S. Method or the hyper corporate method outcompetes, right? But like, let's dive deeper into that, like, because you've also had experiences on both, and I'd love to hear how you've landed into that balance of like, okay, for this is our approach for this market, this is our approach for this other market.
There's a fun fact because obviously, as contrary to most of the Latin American people, I was born in the U.S. and I moved to Guatemala. So it was the other way around. But I do consider myself more Guatemalan than I do American, and just because I've been living here the vast majority of my life. So understanding and taking that warmth, that customer centric approach that we as Latin Americans have, aside from that direct, straightforward, and get things done, which I love the fact that that's something that happens in the North American market. So when you said that something in between, that's my mind went straight to that, where you can be that service type of approach, but getting things done. We usually in Latin America, we just procrastinate things, right? Like, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do this 2 days from now, etc. And in the US, it's like, when will you have that done? Which is a fun fact, which is something curious, obviously, that there's no translation for accountability in Spanish. And that's what accountability is all about, right? Like getting things done. And usually, and usually it's just like responsibility, which is nowhere near the full focus of accountability. But obviously that's what I think that would be the best mix if we could merge both of those warmthness experience and that proud of helping or serving, etc., with hey, I need this done, and not going around the bushes just saying, hey, I need this by this date, and please make sure to forward it to Tough. In Latin America, what we do is we just write these big texts of asking, I hope you're all well, etc. Remember last time that we need. So we give all the story before just going into what we actually need. So that's like the approach. And obviously, it's if you ask me, I've gone the middle. So it's for me, it's easy to go to a US client and go to a Latin American client because I'll approach them the same way. The thing what happens in Latin America is that obviously one word can mean so many things in all for these countries, so you have to just be careful with that. but but I think that that's one of the fun things about you know providing services to companies around Latin America. But to be fairly honest, I don't know what's your grasp on that, but that's the difference that I see on both the U.S. and the Latin America clients.
Yeah, no, and a very similar observations in the cultural differences. It's like it is about the relationship and the long chat and meetings that may or may not have defined ending hours. And balancing that is a tricky art, I think, because you don't want to come across as offensive
Right,
by getting straight to the point or by trying to be efficient with time. Um, but you also don't want to miss out on the serendipity and opportunities that happen because of the extra information you get from that relationship. Like somebody's going
right.
through something, and that gives you intelligence that you can work with. Or they know somebody, or they went to this event, they're part of this club. Like there's network effects that you can tap into that are
Yeah.
um, interesting, and balancing the two is very tricky. Um, but let's talk about culture, because I think that there's a bigger sense of like a country's culture, or an ethnic group of people's culture, and that there's very specific like company culture. How do you think of the relationship between like the institutions that we're a part of and how those cultures connect, and how that could be our starting point for that to then change culture?
Um, so I think that there's one key component, and one of my colleagues she always say that culture is the way you live in a company, and it's the feeling that you get when it's 5 p.m. on a Sunday, and that feeling that you get on whether I'm really excited to go to work tomorrow, or I'm anxious, or I'm stressed, etc. So that can tell you a lot about the company culture. And obviously, there's a lot of components that have to take into consideration. Not only the country that they're in, but beyond that, culture is everything that you do. I mean, as the chats in the hallway, is the way you write an email, is the way you give feedback, the way you address your personnel, the way you communicate. So you have all of these items that make up for your culture that obviously allow you to respond to what the company culture is. And there was this one story where I asked someone, like, what's the culture here? And the response was, we have no culture. And to me, that was a trigger because obviously that can give me a lot of perspective because there's definitely a culture. But is it a culture of fear? Is it a culture of what type of culture do you guys have? And obviously, it's not only about your vision, your mission, your values, your purpose on the wall. It's about everything people do and don't do, what leaders allow them to do, what leaders allow them to communicate, the way a leader begins to self model himself or act as a role model. So, setting clear and professional goals is about culture. Um, so, when it comes to company culture, I would say that it's just about your DNA. It's what people, what makes people connect with your company, what makes them feel proud about your company. Why would I put this shirt every single day to represent the company and take it to the next level? So to me, that's a little bit of the culture. And what drives the culture to change? There can be very various types of items that cause a company to change.
Yeah, and I want to get into those, but I wanted to highlight what I think is one of the great examples of company culture. So I worked at Google for 4 years, and they have a whole analytics department around their culture.
Right,
Like it's very scientific method. Like if we use this language, how much does this affect our metrics?
right,
And they, but one of the techniques that they use that I think is really interesting is that they, the adjective googly, something is googly or it's not googly. And so that then you can say, it's almost like a machine learning algorithm where it's like, that is googly or that is not googly. And everyone socializes that idea of like, oh, what does it mean to be googly? Nobody really knows, but I could tell you if this is googly or not. Um, and, Googlers are supposed to be googly and Google
right,
products are supposed to be googly. And, obviously they had issues as they were scaling out to be hundreds of thousands of employees. But in general, I found that there's a very effective mechanism to have, an ideal state. What does the ideal person look like, and how do we hold each other accountable to be that ideal person? But this is hard to do. This requires a lot of buy-in. It requires a lot of people to maintain a standard of etiquette, let's call it, or like a new pattern of behavior that they weren't applying before.
right.
So how do you break those molds? Because culture is also like what you autopilot back into if you aren't intentional about stuff, right?
Right, because and obviously in a nutshell, like company culture is the company's personality, right? So what the personality of the organization is, what's influencing everything from every single employee. So, and I love the fact that you brought up Google. I think that it's one of the companies that most of us in the culture world look after. But you have a lot of different examples. You have Netflix, you have Pepsi, you have all of these big companies that really take you to a level where you don't even want to consume any products from an additional company that's not yours because obviously you're so identified with that company that takes you to the next level, right? Yeah, you're on spot.
But let's talk about some of these changing patterns. So I'm sure you get the whole gamut of experience where it's like, say, for instance, a family company where there's like a traditional,
Right,
a patriarch or matriarch running the company, and they have their own way of doing things, and maybe they're struggling with scaling or things of the sort. And there's an automatic way of doing things, right? There's just that's just the way that we do it. This communication happens. The manager has to approve this. I don't know, there's like the implicit rules of behavior that are, let's say, somewhat codified. There may be a manual or something, but they may also be tribal, and you have to ask somebody
Right.
who has to tell you. Um, but then let's say they hire you guys, and they're like, you know what, we need to really step up our game. We need to innovate in the space. Like we need to innovate the printing space, or we need to innovate in a new kind of space. Um, what is the magic? Like, how do you first of all identify the key behavioral things you need to change, and then how do you ensure that they are upheld?
Well, I think one is self awareness, right? And I think that that's the number one. If someone is aware that they need to change, they'll find the ways and the tools to do so. So you might be pointed out that you need to change something, but if you're not willing to, if you're not willing to walk that path or do what it takes in order to happen, I mean, don't even start walking, man. I mean that I think that that's number one. But for me, when it comes to these high level executives, so take for instance these you were saying, uh, let's talk about the first generation moving into the third generation of a family company. Obviously, coaching them is one of the tools that we would be using. Obviously, understanding why do you want to change? I mean, what's happening now that you're moving from uh, your first your grandpa, you're moving into your uh, dad, now it's your turn. Why are you taking over right now? So understanding what's happening within the context, that's key. Because obviously, is grandpa retiring? Uh, is he just looking to take less of the company right now? What's going on? And obviously, the coaching experience has to be um, somehow of it can be two paths, right? Just preparing them to hand over or helping them to unlearn. And what do I mean by unlearn? Um, Obviously, when you're a CEO and when this happens, you feel like you're this person that knows it all or that knows a lot about everything. So to us, when it comes to coaching these types of C suites, it's all about the unlearning journey, right? So it's always relied on top down leadership, and they're introduced to self management through coaching, right? So they're initially resistant, they're hesitant, they don't want to go through that because obviously, why is someone so young going to tell me what to do or to take this step? So what we do is, hey, let's just take the unlearning journey, and this will allow you to understand more a little bit about self awareness, emotional regulation, continuous learning, AI, knowing that there can be someone else that can do the job, just trusting and letting go, just knowing that the company needs to go at a different direction. And you see this a lot now that we're just merging and that millennials are turning to the biggest workforce in the world. This is something that's really happening, and you're seeing it more constantly in every single company because now you're moving from a traditional paced company into a fast paced company. It has to be digital, has to be up, up with the AI experience, has to understand more about emotions, has to deal with the employee experience. They have to be digital, but also human. So, how do you combine both of those worlds? And that's what we do through coaching. We do it through coaching, we do it through mentoring as well. Because the mentoring program, when you think of a mentor, you always think of these uh, wise old people, right? So I always think about Mr. Miyagi or someone like that. But mentoring right now is all about a two-way street. It's a
Yeah.
quid pro quo. You give me something, I give you something. Take me, for example. I'm learning everything about social media.
Okay.
So I just recently found out now that you can not only send you I hate voice notes in WhatsApp, but I just recently learned that you can now send video notes. I mean, I wasn't even aware of that. So it's something that you just exchange with people. And that's what we do when it comes to mentoring. Like, okay, let me be in your shoes for once. Now you come to mine. And that's how we actually work.
I see. So there's a very much a like a dialectical conversation where there are exercises, let's call them, that you essentially get your coachees to do so that they can realize, oh, this is how the things that I'm putting out are being perceived, and this is how I can relate to that feedback loop better. Is
Right.
that fair? Would you say?
It is actually, yeah. Because I would say through coaching, you have to do the learning yourself, right? We're just giving you another view. We're just helping you out, walking with you and just letting, hey, have you seen this? Or how does this make you feel? And start asking the proper questions in order for that person to figure things by himself and just getting that gut feeling, never realized that this could be something.
Mm.
So I wasn't aware that I could do this or feel this, etc. So that's obviously you give them some tasks, right? And we call it a journey because it's not something that you go from one day to another. It's not like building a habit,
Oh
right?
yeah,
Yeah, it's
it
like
is.
it's
That's
like a journey actually.
But that, and I think that's the point that I was trying to get at. It's a habitual change, right? You need to
Right.
develop new habits, and that alone, even for your own personal things, is pretty tricky. Like changing your eating
For
habits,
sure.
changing your sleeping habits, changing your finance
Yeah.
habits. These are tricky things because they become invisible to us, right? And they
Right.
and so I think that there's tremendous value to having an accountability partner, which is like what I
Yeah.
think of coaching is just like somebody who's not gonna let you uh, essentially bullshit yourself out of doing the thing that matters. Because I think that that is also something that people can gravitate to. I know I'm guilty of this. Is like we'll find other distracting things to do instead of the most important things, and then sort of have the quintessential drama of, okay, but if I want other people in the organization to focus on the most important thing, then I should do it myself. Um,
Right. Exactly.
but I wanted to ask you, what are some of the particular cases that you're the most proud of, or like the coaching relationships that you have seen? If you want to give me just like an example of someone who you engaged with in a relationship and they essentially were able to overcome a lot of their limitations that maybe they hadn't even realized.
Yeah. I recently had this coachee, and we did it through coaching because obviously it was one of my first experiences coaching someone older than me. And by older than me, I mean 25 years older than me.
Wow.
And, he was always closed into what am I going to do next? And no one had taken the time to understand what was his concern, right? And just he was dealing with all these stressful situations on a daily basis. He thought himself of being this person that was always going to be needed in the company, but all of a sudden, downsizing comes into place. So this stress comes into play, saying I don't have anything planned. I haven't prepared myself to understand what am I going to do next, because obviously he never asked the right questions into understanding what he wanted to do next, right? So there was fear, there was anger, there was a lot of emotions happening. So we went through it was actually a very long journey. It was about 8 months through coaching, obviously, and just understanding, hey, what is it that you love to do? I mean, that was like question number three. And that was when he figured out, I've been doing this just for the money, but this is not what I love. So imagine just being in a company for 25 years and figuring out that you only done the things that you've been doing on a daily basis for the money, not because you love it, not because it makes you feel good, not because it energizes you. So once we took that path, he obviously started thinking outside the box on, I actually want to teach. I want to translate every single thing that I know, put it out there, let people know how they can be better at supply chain and operations, etc. So he built himself a plan. I mean, he's still in the company, but he's now prepared in case he downsides, he's fired, he's retired, or even if he takes that decision into stepping down, saying, okay, now I want to do what I love, right? Uh, I still follow up with him because I do have this thing that I keep my coachees engaged. It becomes a uh, partnership. So he still hasn't decided on stepping down, but he's obviously keeping his plan updated. He lastly told me that now he's even recording his own courses, etc. So to me, that's gratifying because you went from having someone who had no idea what he was doing, he was very angry, he was frustrated, etc., to now having someone who's peaceful, calm, and is actually even doing some of the stuff that he wants to do on his spare time. So I think that that's one of the things that I really treasure about coaching, especially C-suite, because obviously I was one of the supply chain directors from one of the biggest companies in Guatemala.
No, I think that's awesome, and I think that case applies to the vast majority of people in the world. Probably the vast majority of people listening to this show are in a position where they had to make decisions about their professional path that were forced by economic decisions, right? And I think that was most of us. I mean, like certainly that informed most of my career, and to a degree still informs it, even though I'm doing
Right.
a Maverick thing right now. But the um, but also, and engaging with these questions is like a very difficult thing. It is incredibly like challenging to look inside and then to see like, okay, these are the things that I enjoy. These are the things that I enjoy and I'm good at. The ikigai principle of what I'm good at, what
For
will make
example,
me
yep.
money, what will, the Venn diagram of the thing that you're supposed to be doing. And oftentimes, we do live in a privileged world, I think, where basically anybody can start a teaching business if they accrue enough expertise in one thing, but it still requires this sort of what do you call it, bravery, maybe courage, to then leap and start doing the thing, right? Because it does require this, I don't know, entrepreneurial kind of mindset. Um, and I think that like in the case of being in a large institution, not even has to be that doesn't even have to be a large institution, but like in an institution of some sort, you have the backing of the institution to sponsor certain initiatives that you might want to take. So a
Right.
lot of like the internal stuff may be covered, but a lot of these more personal things, like I want to write poetry, for instance, that was a crazier one, but there are people who are born to be poets, and the world is better
Right.
if they
Yeah.
write poetry.
Yeah.
So how do you confront that side? Because that is a tricky personal identity shift that needs to happen to go from, I'm going through the motions versus I'm taking charge and I'm putting myself out there to create something new.
Um, I think that the best example of that is me. I was actually working at a large consulting firm, handling clients across America. So I was the only consultant that was working North America, Latin America, and Brazil. Um, and obviously the learning experience, everything that you had in that specific role was amazing. You got to know a lot of companies all over the world, a lot of people, understanding cultures, knowing that we weren't that different from mindset, from a belief perspective, etc. Um, but there was something missing. Obviously, I think I'm one of those COVID cases. I came to a point
Mm.
in COVID where I was working nonstop for maybe 18 to 20 hours a day because, everyone went global. people starting to leave the company, etc. So you went from being an America's consultant into a global consultant. And that was like addressing calls with Australia, which is a 16-hour difference, addressing calls with India, with the Philippines, etc. So I was missing out on one key thing in my life, which was I was missing out on my daughter's growth. So obviously, I went through my ikigai. I went through this whole transformation phase and understanding what my purpose was. And obviously, outside of being a father, well, I had a very distant relationship with my father, not because none of us had this connection or loved each other, but I was living down here and he was in the US. And you were growing in in a place where obviously there was no WhatsApp, there was no email at that time, obviously. So it was just about letters every now and then. Calls were, really expensive. So take that. So I didn't want my daughters to go through that. So obviously I went to um, to this meditation, to this introspection, etc., to understand, okay, what am I going to do? And this is one of the things that I normally get. I don't love what I'm doing, but I'm too afraid of moving forward because I need the money, because I won't have stability, because I won't have a paycheck at the end of every month. Um, so that was my mindset as well. And facing that fear and helping people face that fear with courage, with faith, with everything that can be brought to the table. I think that's one of the most wonderful experiences you might have. In my case, I I went, I always tell people that I'm very well, guy that has full trust in the Lord above. And obviously, I said to myself, okay, if you're not happy, do you want to spend unhappy the next 10 years of your life? This was in my 30s. So that was like the most powerful question that I did to myself. And obviously, the answer was no. And rest assured that the journey hasn't been easy because it hasn't. It's like I resigned in June, I guess, 2021. And in January 2022, I had to knock on my mom's door and ask her for a loan because I couldn't even afford my kids' school. But obviously, if you're resilient, if you have confidence in yourself, etc., things will come along. You have to believe and you have to just defy those fears, etc., and take it to the next level. So I think it's all about you wanting it more than anyone else and believing that you're capable of doing that. And the rest of the people around that made it happen, they were facilitators. They were just shotgun person. They were just traveling with me. But obviously, I think that one of the things that we definitely need is us to be the driver of our own destiny.
Yeah, there's this uh recently viral Paul Graham essay. Paul Graham is the Y Combinator guy
Yeah,
about founder mode. And
right.
that's like all the rage lately about like taking things in your own hands and extreme ownership
Yeah.
over the company. And it's very tied to these ideas of culture. I think like an organization is the extension of the founder's personality. Like the founder's personality essentially will have an outsized impact on the culture of the organization. Um, so just to echo the fact what you were saying, you need to be the one driving, and everybody else is gonna dance along, but you have to be the one charging.
You have to be your own DJ. That's what I'm saying. Everyone's going to be dancing. Everyone's going to have a good time or a bad time, but you play the music. I mean, that's you play what you love to hear, and that will get you places without
Yeah,
question.
So I'm also curious to hear, because I understand the coaching relationship well. I'm familiar with the model of what a coach does for a person or a team. Um, but I'm interested in your notion of mentorship, because I've always thought of mentors as being like informal people who are like a couple years ahead, maybe like 3 or 4 or 5 years ahead, and it's like a little bit of a preview of what the next few years are going to be like. So I'm thinking, like, if not your manager at a company, maybe like the most senior person on the
Right.
team when you join. That kind of relationship, and it is a mentorship because they're trying to show you the ropes. In general, they want you to succeed, and in general, you want them to look good too. So you sort of like work together, and you sort of live up to each other's expectations. Um, but what does it work? How does it work in a more commercial way, or like a programmatic way? Let's call it, where you have like a whole kind of relationship with the customer that's a mentorship relationship.
Well, in my case, I do mentorship for HR. So when it comes to n- navigating people on HR transformation perspective, that's where I'm more focused on. Because obviously you always have like HR has to be the human side, and HR has to be everything about people. And and to be fairly honest, HR is not about HR, and I'm quoting David Orr, but it's obviously you need to be in HR to think about your stakeholders. You need to be in HR to think about business, to think about employees. So uh, in Latin America, we still have that mindset that HR is only for employees. So helping them navigate and just understand that there's more stakeholders than just the employees and more impact that HR can have for a company. Because when you think HR, you think cost, right? You don't think investment. Unfortunately, that's the reality of the vast majority of companies. So how can HR add value to the company and earn a seat at the table? So that's how I address the mentorship part. And to be fairly honest, that thing that you were saying about that's how we viewed mentors, right? That senior director, that VP, that's above my current manager, or even someone else who's. It doesn't have to be uh, someone way up in the hierarchy levels, but to me, a mentor can also be someone who's sitting right next to me. And the example that comes to mind is think about AI. Our mentors, as we view them, they've been nothing but traditional. And what about these kids that are now developing AI solutions, etc.? They can mentor them into what AI is all about, and they can mentor, and these guys can also mentor these guys into strategy and operations, etc. So that's why I was saying that right now it's a very interesting crossroad because it has to be a two-way street also. I show you things, you show me things.
I mean, when as soon as you say the magic word AI, I mean, I'm sure everybody at this point knows that I go into a different kind of mode myself. But I mean, I think it's like the most fascinating time to think about all this kind of stuff in the context of AI accelerating things, right?
Right.
And I mean, the rate of change is really neck breaking in terms of just like the
It is.
practices. Even if you set out to be a software engineer today, the tools that you would work with to be an effective software engineer today probably did not exist 3 years ago. And this is
Right.
it's an
Exactly.
industry that's been around for 50, 60 years, if not more. And so, but this is going to get to everything. This is going to be to content creation, to human resources. And I also wanted to echo, I was fortunate enough to read Jack Welch's biography pretty early on. And he was the CEO of General Electric
Like,
for a very long
yeah.
time, and he had this very interesting HR philosophy where it was like HR is at the top, it's in the C-suite, um, but it does have to get over that hump of being a compliance organization or a
Right.
dispute resolution organization. Um, But also, and here's something interesting that I've noted from our conversation so far is that you talk about organizations in HR, but it borders on things like marketing, right? Like at some point, if you have the organization's purpose figured out, that can help for marketing materials. It can also help for product decisions, right? And so can you elaborate a bit on that? On how do you bleed or how do you amplify the findings that you help executives uncover through different orgs? You know, not just HR, but like how do you get something that was found in an HR process to make it to marketing materials?
But for example, to me, HR and marketing need to work hand to hand. And the reason why is because obviously there's a talent war going on. How am I going to make an offer, or how am I going to position our company to be attractive to a top talent, a top tiered employee, or a top talented person or professional to come join the company? Obviously, I need branding and I need marketing to help me out in putting the word out there. That's one. And obviously, I also need them through internal communications. I need them to sell and help me in a graphic way, in an attractive way, to engage people and have them talk about us and let them be our brand ambassadors and let them talk. Why are we a great company to be part of? Should you build a career here with us? So that's one thing. Obviously, then you have the part of being operational excellence, for example. It doesn't have to be something where you have to train people to have the right set of skills in order to be successful where they need to be. And obviously, every company is looking at operational excellence. Okay, but do we have them properly trained to do their job? No, we don't. Okay, so there's either we go to the market, we reskill, or we upskill the employee. So those are like two quick examples of where you can help out each other. Obviously, in finance, there's a lot of efficiencies that you can do, right? There's ratio that you can work. Okay, so the supervisor ratio needs to be here. The manager ratio needs to be here. Bonuses. Why are we exceeding the bonuses when they're not meeting the targets, etc.? So having in place this nice performance culture that allows the company to reward when needed, that's going to help finance also take care of the budget, for example. So I think that those three are very good examples of how HR can partner with the rest of the organization.
No, it makes so much sense, and I think that there's a hand holding process that you probably have to do where it's like you have to sustain the conversation and go through a few iterations before you can actually step out and say, all right, the company is transformed now. Um,
Right.
so how do you approach that aspect of it? The fact that, there's a targeted transformation a company wants to make, and you approach them and they, enact a plan, let's say, like you come up with a plan to change the company. And how does it work toward the end? Like when you're reaching the metrics, when you're approaching, end of the engagement type of relationship. How does that work for you?
So, first, obviously, when it comes to transformation, unfortunately, there's this misconception of transformation. And what I do is because when we talk about transformation, we instantly link it to digital transformation. And transformation is so much more than that. You can transform your culture, transform your processes, transform your technology. So it's a whole ecosystem that needs to happen before moving into the digital world. And I'm sure you coming from a tech company, sure that you know that first you map out the processes, then you digitalize. Obviously, if you don't do that, probably what comes in bad goes out bad. So to me, the first step is transforming the leadership and transforming the culture itself. Then you move into processes. Once you have that, once you have the sponsorship, once you have the people locked in and they're actually the ambassadors of the change, then you move into the next stage. Then you move into processes. You find what you can eliminate, you find you can standardize, you can optimize, understand what can move out of the way, and then you move into the digital world. And when does it end for us? I like to say that it never ends, because to me, the only constant in the world is change. So even though you've reached your goal, there's always going to be time for you to do it better. There's always going to be a faster way to do it. There's always going to be a more agile way to do it. So it'll keep constantly changing and changing and changing. We obviously allow clients to navigate through a second or third change by themselves, but they always come back.
Hmm. And I think that's a great sign. I mean, like it's every time you do it is an act of courage, right? And so every time you do it, you're letting go of an old identity and you're embracing a new one. So that um, I mean, there's no shortage of challenges there. So I could totally see why, especially if they have a great experience with you, they would be excited to come back. I have another question, which is what happens when you have competing visions at senior leadership, for instance, or like in the C-suite, competing visions for what the change should look like. I'm sure you deal with that too.
Yeah, yeah. I think that the only one word comes to mind, and what we try to do is to be just the empathy piece. It's okay. Let's meet halfway. I mean, you might have your point of view, what you're bringing to the table adds up. Now listen to me, and let's see how we can both of our ideas can merge and come. Obviously it's not a 1 hour thing, right, Christian? It's something that needs to happen, and you need to develop, you need to bring to the table what's the pros and cons of each of the views that you might have. It's not about just, okay, we'll stick only to yours, but maybe we can use yours and complement mine and come up with something better, something that allows us. So uh, specifically today, we had a meeting earlier today where there were two different points of view, completely opposite. One was through ops, and the other one was through a more sales approach, right? So it's like, which is the most common conflict that you might find in companies, right?
Sure, yeah.
But it was like, obviously,
It's
how
always sales and
would you?
somebody. Let me just be the first to say it.
Yes, that's very true. That's very true. Yeah. So it was like, okay, how can we make your life easier? But how can you help us not complying with every single thing the client asks for? So, it started out, it took us like about 3 hours to be fairly honest, but it started now to be something like, okay, I understand your pain. I understand what am I causing you, and now you understand the pain that you're causing me. So that's why I say empathy, because obviously that needs to happen in order for us to understand that our actions are impacting someone else. And it's not only about me. We need to think that for the bigger cost. It's for the benefit of the company. It's not about your bonus. It's about us growing and striving and making things happen. So I do think that those um, exercises or conflict management exercises are very helpful when it comes to those stressful situations when you have two different points of opinion. That's only when you have two. But if things where you have like five different views, and it's like, okay, let's try to join all of our views and see what's our what are our minimum specifics, or what are our non-negotiables. I mean, where are we all on the same boat? And then you drive it. We drive from there.
No, it's so interesting and so essential. I mean, like some of these are so uh such basic being a human in the 21st century skills that I think need to be developed
Yeah.
and taught
Oh yeah.
way earlier. Like definitely not in college. This should be like dispute resolution should be a thing in middle school. Like
Yeah.
when you're
And
starting to get into your hormones are acting up and you're like starting and learning how to manage that, I think that would be a good chance to do it. Or a few
Yeah.
years later, who knows?
Yeah.
Um,
And something else that I do think that, they should teach us how to let go of our ego. I think that that's one of the
oh,
hardest things. So I think that that's one of the biggest issues when it comes to things like this, like putting your ego against mine and it'll take you nowhere. So just, I think we had one client that, uh, in their meeting room, when you close the door, they had this poster that says, hang your ego here before joining the meeting. So it was wonderful because it was like, okay, no, this is not personal. This is business. This is for the good of the company. It's not about me. It's about the company. So I think that when I heard you say that, that was the word that dispute management is something that we definitely need to look at.
and there's another layer there, which is we're right next to it, which is like the techniques to learn how to let go of your ego. You mentioned
Right.
meditation, and you mentioned these kinds of experiences that help people break out of their model of the world. Like the first
Right.
person shooter approach to uh, their universe essentially. You want to talk a little bit about that, and maybe like a little bit of your personal experience and how that has informed some of your decisions?
Well, yeah, I'm still working on it. I think letting go of your ego, it's one of the toughest things to do. But it's something that you can constantly do when you look that there's something bigger than your own desires, your own ambitions. And when you start looking at how you can impact and benefit other people and the feeling that you get out of that, the rewardness and understanding that things will come around and they will definitely be better because you took action that were against your own ego. I think that that's a wonderful place. I myself have I call them my Avengers, but they're like my safe people, when I'm feeling like something's not wrong, I have an Avenger for each item of my life. So it's like if something's wrong at work, I know who to go to. If I had something wrong with my relationship and my girlfriend, I know who to go to. If I'm struggling with uh, something personal, I know who to go to. So they're like these vitamin people that are not going to be able to help you out, uh, in every situation, but you know who to go to when you're dealing with something. Um, so I think that those things are very good to have. Obviously, having your own mentor who you can ventilate and having those safe spaces uh, that where you're allowed to be yourself. I have this theory that we're mostly in every single action of our daily lives we're wearing masks, and it's only when we're by ourselves that we actually are who we are and are in our normal state. So being able to be that person with someone can help you out. And outside of meditation, there's a lot of cards where you have this card game where it comes like with 50 questions, and grab one card daily and respond to that question and write it down. Journaling, I think it's another thing that helps out a lot when it comes to leaving your ego aside, how you felt, talking about your emotions. I know that, we were taught as men not to show emotions. So you're not able to cry. No, men don't cry. It's like, of course we do. And so it's like breaking all these barriers that we were taught when we were kids. So being able to have those safe spaces and talking about your emotions, writing them down, having your go-to person, meditating, uh, do what you love. I mean, I don't know about you, but I lost track on when was the last time I did my hobby. and we never take time for ourselves. It's always about doing everything for someone else, not enjoying what we actually do. I mean, I love going camping, for example. I loved running and I stopped doing it. Why? I don't know, but it's something that just invites me now that I'm talking to you. It invites me to just reconnect with that and do something that I do love for myself.
Yeah, it's you also reminded me of, did you know that the word for the Greek word for person, persona, means mask.
Mask, yeah.
So literally every person you know is defined by their mask, the mask that they wear. And isn't it funny that they invented the mask
Yeah,
before the concept of a person?
yeah, it
uh,
is.
Chris, this was a fascinating conversation, man. I really appreciate your time. I thought this was really valuable. It is very obvious to me that you really care about what you do, and I feel grateful for the companies that get to engage with your services and get to sort of get have a bit more hands-on connection with you. I think it's been wonderful, man. I really appreciate your time.
No, Christian, thank you for having me. I think it's wonderful. I saw every single one of your videos right now that were shared. And I think it's great with these capsules, these learning experience that you're sharing with the world, these random comments, these random learnings. You keep doing that. It's pretty amazing. And thanks for having me. I know we could have talked more about a lot of things, leadership, purpose, etc. But thank you very much for opening the space for me to talk and having me.
Of course, thanks for being a part of it, and all that stuff we will hopefully have a chance to explore later at another date.
Definitely, definitely. Thank you very much, Kristen. You have a great rest of your day.
You too.